Governments, as well as private industry, are pondering over the social and moral issues and the boundaries of freedom of speech. Can the two cooperate? Our first panel deals with exactly this and is entitled Confronting Online Hate Speech, Tech and Government in Conversation. And here we will hear from the academy, from government, and from the internet industry. Dr. Shwartz Altshuler will present the main considerations and core questions in the debate on hate speech on social networks. Dr. Shwartz Altshuler.
It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. For most of modern history, the easiest way to prevent an idea from spreading was to keep it from being industrially disseminated. Shadow the newspaper, pressure the broadcaster, find the right choke point, then squeeze. In today's networked environment, where anyone can broadcast live or post their thoughts on social networks, it seems that censorship ought to be impossible. This should be the golden age of free speech. And sure, it is a golden age of free speech, if you believe your deceptive eyes. Is that footage you're watching real? Was it really filmed where and when it says it was? Is it being shared by alt-right trolls or a swarm of Russian bots? The most effective forms of censorship today involve meddling with trust, not muzzling speech itself. As a result, they don't look much like the old forms of censorship at all. They look like coordinated harassment and hate speech campaigns which harness the dynamics of viral outrage. They look like epidemics of cyber anti-Semitism and disinformation meant to undercut the credibility of valid sources of information. Nowadays, the distribution of the world's attention is controlled and structured by just a few digital platforms. These companies, which claimed to be the pinnacles of free speech, have attained a degree of power unlike anything the world has ever seen. They have come to stand in for the public sphere itself. But for Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, all speech, whether it's a breaking news story, an animal video, an anti-Semitic meme, or a clever advertisement for Razor, is nothing but content. The thing is, as Jonathan Swift wrote in Gulliver's Travels, that falsehood flies and the truth comes limping after it. It was a hyperbole 3 centuries ago, but it is a factual description of social media today, according to an ambitious study published just last week by Science. The study found that falsehood consistently dominates the truth on Twitter. Fake news and false rumors reach more people, penetrate deeper into social networks, and spread much faster than accurate news stories. To a similar degree, when YouTube autoplay feature lets videos about vegetarianism lead to videos about veganism, and videos about jogging lead to videos about running ultra marathons, YouTube may be one of the most powerful radicalizing instruments of the 21st century. This is not because a bunch of YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter engineers are plotting to drive the world off a cliff. A more likely explanation has to do with the nexus of artificial intelligence and these internet companies' business models. For all their lofty rhetorics, there are advertising brokers selling our attention to companies that will pay for it. Not to put too fine a point on it, but all of this invalidates much of what we think about free speech, conceptually, legally, and ethically. John Stuart Mill's notion that a marketplace of ideas will elevate the truth is belied by the virality of hate speech. By this point, we've already seen enough to recognize that the business model behind the big tech platforms does not encourage the kind of behavior that fosters democratic governance or tolerance. So, the rules and incentives which underlie how attention and surveillance work on the internet need to change. The stakes are high. In the past, it has taken generations for humans to develop the political and institutional antibodies to deal with the byproducts of previous information revolutions. First, tech platforms must be more transparent about their systems' flaws and vulnerabilities. For example, the Cambridge Analytica scandal that was exposed only 2 days ago as a creator of autonomy trap for potential voters could be used just as well to turn people into Nazis. Tech platforms need to alert the public and the government as to the extent of the misuse and abuse. Something bad happened. Here's how we're going to make sure it doesn't happen again, even if it means putting the leg on the viral pedal. Second, they ought to be precise and transparent regarding the definition, design, and application of their community standards. The public has a right to know who makes the decisions, humans or machines, and to what extent these decision makers understand the delicate context in which abusive speech occurs. We shouldn't wait for whistleblowers or creative investigative journalists to know that. However, transparency is not enough. It might be that only financial liability and the direct threat of feature-level regulation will make companies prioritize the kind of decision-making that protects society from the worst kind of harm. What's more important is that the solution to the problems of digital discourse should not be left to the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world or their artificial intelligence systems to decide. We all have a seat at the table when it comes to far-reaching political decisions that could change the face of society, and it's our responsibility to take this seat. But before we start thinking about what forms of regulation are appropriate and which institutions should enforce them, we must remember that government intervention, too, has its risks. In fact, it could totally alter the nature of the internet and its unique features as we know it today. For starters, it is no secret that many countries have exploited technology not in order to expand the protection of human rights and fight abusive speech and terror, which is well justified, but in order to restrict the freedom of citizens, monitor their actions and digital activities, and in practice, deter dissidents. Well, chilling. We need only to remember that politicians find themselves in a conflict of interests when they seek to regulate those whose main function it is to criticize government activities. Just look at our Prime Minister, and he's certainly not alone. Have we really managed to regulate content outside of the internet so that we can expect to do it now? Secondly, the threat of regulation can also lead to informal collaboration between giant companies and governments. Governments are afraid of viral posts targeting welfare officers or of the incitement of terrorism that might threaten public safety. Please, the companies say, simply ask us. We'll remove the offensive content immediately. There's no need for legislation. And let's set up a direct channel of communication to deal with all future incidents. This brings to an unholy marriage of government and internet platform, as we've seen in Israel over the past year and a half. There's no need to waste words on the vast quantity of information possessed by the internet giants and the potential for its abuse. Should the day ever come when all these forces unite, individual right will be a thing of the past. Lastly, legislators have a tendency to address side concerns as opposed to the core issues. Take, for example, the Facebook or the Twitter bill that is currently being considered for legislation by the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, and will be broadly discussed in this panel. In my opinion, this bill will not serve as a substantial addition to current legislative and policy toolkits. Not only this, but focusing merely on the bill as the answer to all of our ills, from terror to public shaming, shadows the root of the matter, which isn't harmful content, it's privacy. It's what may or may not be done with our personal information. Well, these are not trivial issues. They raise social, economic, and constitutional questions and involve multiple stakeholders. But ultimately, the responsibility to rethink what freedom of expression should look like in this golden digital age should be in our hands. Well, to come full circle to the quote with which I opened, allow me to paraphrase Dickens. It is up to us to decide whether we're all going direct to heaven or we're all going direct the other way. Thank you.